The day Adaela Osei-Mensah walked into the Lakewood Aquatic Center. For the first time, the head coach looked at her the way people look at something they've already decided to throw away. Coach Terrence Brody stood at the edge of Pool 2, clipboard pressed against his chest, and watched her cross the deck in her worn Speedo suit and knockoff cap. He didn't say hello. He looked at the other coaches, the assistant, the timekeepers, the volunteers, and he said, loudly enough for the entire pool deck to hear, "Tell me someone didn't actually let her register." Adaela kept walking. She had learned, young, not to stop for that kind of noise. She was 23 years old. She had grown up in Brampton, in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled of her mother's Ghanaian cooking and the damp that came up through the walls every winter. Her mother, Adaela Osei-Mensah, had worked double shifts at the hospital laundry for 11 years, folding other people's sheets, going home with hands cracked from the bleach and the cold. Adaela had watched her do it without complaint and had promised herself, somewhere around age 12, that she would give her mother a reason to sit down someday.
Up by accident.
The community pool near their building offered free lessons on Saturday mornings through a city program. Adaela had gone because there was nothing else to do and because the pool was warm and their apartment wasn't. The instructor, a retired competitive swimmer named Mr. Delacroix, who wore the same faded Team Canada windbreaker every week, had watched her do her first lap and had looked at her the way you look at something you don't expect and can't quite believe. "How long have you been swimming?" he'd asked. "This is my first time," she'd said. He didn't say anything. He just handed her a better pair of goggles from his bag. She trained through high school in municipal pools and borrowed lane time, with Mr. Delacroix writing her programs on the back of paper bags and driving her to time trials in his Civic. She had no team, no club membership, no sponsorship. She had a stopwatch and a notebook, and a mother who packed her sandwiches before every meet and prayed out loud in Twi on the drive back home. By the time she was 22, her times were good enough to be noticed. A national talent identification program had flagged her name. She had been offered a development spot at Lakewood, one of the country's top high-performance centers, for the 200-meter freestyle. She had driven 7 hours from Brampton, with everything she owned in 2 bags, and now here was Terrence Brody, looking at her like she had wandered in off the street. "You're late," he said, even though she wasn't. She had checked 3 times. "I'm Adaela Osei-Mensah. I'm in the development program." He looked at his clipboard. He looked back at her. He made a sound in the back of his throat that wasn't quite a word. "Development program," he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like an insult. "Right, well, Osei-Mensah." He drew out the name deliberately, a fraction too long, a fraction too wrong, as if the syllables were difficult on purpose. "You can take lane 8. Lane 8, the outside lane, the lane they gave to the kids who were being assessed before being let go. The lane where the water was coldest because the filtration ran weakest, where the light was worst, where no serious training happened." She took lane 8. She warmed up quietly. She did her sets. She hit her splits. Nobody said anything to her that first day. The second week, Brody ran time trials. He had 4 other development swimmers, 2 men, 2 women, and he lined them up at the blocks with the kind of energy that suggested he'd already made up his mind about all of them. He timed the men first, called out their splits in a voice that carried encouragement and correction in equal measure. Then the women. When it was Adaela's turn, he looked at his watch instead of the water. She dove anyway. 200 meters. She didn't think about him. She thought about her mother's hands. She thought about the Civic and the paper bags, and Mr. Delacroix saying, "You have something that cannot be taught." She turned at the wall. She pulled. She breathed only when she had to. She touched the pad. There was a pause. The assistant coach, a young woman named Petra, who had been quiet and watchful all morning, looked at her stopwatch and then looked at Brody. "Coach, I see it," he said. He didn't call out the time, not to the group. He wrote it down, clicked his pen, and said flatly, "Again tomorrow." That was it. No acknowledgement, no correction, No engagement. Just the flat, deliberate nothing of a man who had decided that what he had seen couldn't be right and wasn't worth responding to until he had made it stop being right. Adaela toweled off and walked back to Lane 8 alone. She went back to her rented room, a basement suite near the center, low ceilings, one window that looked at a concrete wall, and she called her mother. He didn't say anything, she said. What were your splits? Her mother asked. She told her. There was a pause, and then Adaela Osei-Mensah, who had spent 11 years folding other people's sheets with cracked hands and had never asked for a single thing in return, said quietly, "Then let him say nothing, just swim." The next 6 weeks were the longest of Adaela's life, and, in some ways, the most clarifying. Brody ran his sessions with the kind of structured indifference that was harder to fight than open hostility. He adjusted the training programs for all 5 development swimmers. He scheduled extra video analysis sessions for the other 4. He arranged for them to consult with the team's sports psychologist. He signed them up for the early morning strength sessions with the national group. Adaela found out about most of these things from Petra, who had started leaving session notes on the whiteboard near Lane 8, as if by accident, making sure Adaela could read them before she erased them. Is he doing this on purpose? Adaela asked one morning, rinsing out her cap. Petra looked at the ceiling. I think he doesn't know what to do with you, she said. And that makes him. She stopped. Just keep your times consistent. Adaela kept her times consistent. She also started doing the extra sessions anyway. She came in at 5 a.m. before the national group arrived and did the strength work from a program she had pulled from the internet and adapted herself. She booked the sports psychologist independently, paying out of pocket from the small development stipend she was receiving, sitting in a beige office on the 3rd floor of the center, and working through the mental preparation protocol calls. One by one, she found the video equipment unlocked on Tuesday afternoons and filmed her own stroke, studying the footage on her laptop in the basement suite with a flashlight because the overhead bulb had blown. And she kept forgetting to tell the landlord. She was not going to give him the satisfaction of falling behind. The meet that changed everything was in Winnipeg in early March. It was a national development circuit event, not the Olympics, not even a trials qualifier, but the kind of meet where selectors watched and notes were made, and doors either opened or didn't. Brody had submitted entry forms for all 5 development swimmers. He had written personal notes for 4 of them. Brief assessments of their progress, their readiness, their development trajectory, which were sent to the selection coordinator as part of the standard package. Adaela's form had been submitted with the notes section blank. She didn't find out until 3 days before the meet, when Petra came to find her at the end of a session, looking like someone who had been making a decision for a while and had finally made it. The selectors got your entry with no assessment notes, Petra said. They're going to default to the general observation category, which means they probably won't be watching your race specifically. They'll be watching the 2 flagged swimmers in your heat. Adaela stood there with water dripping off cap onto the pool deck. She thought about the 5 a.m. sessions. She thought about the beige office and the video footage and the flashlight. She thought about Lane 8. Which heat am I in? She asked. Heat 3, first race of the day. Who else? Petra told her. The 2 flagged swimmers were both strong, one a former junior national medalist, the other a scholarship swimmer from a university program who had been training at high performance level for 4 years. Adaela nodded slowly. Will you be in the timing area? She asked. Petra looked at her. I'll be in the timing area, she said. Winnipeg in March is not kind. The drive to the aquatic center from the hotel was gray and cold, the streets still carrying the last of the season's road salt, the sky the color of old concrete. Adaela sat in the back of the team van and looked out the window and didn't speak to anyone. Brody sat in the front and talked to the other coaches about an unrelated equipment issue for 45 minutes. The center was loud in the way competition venues always are. That particular noise of echoing water and announcements and the squeak of rubber-soled feet on wet tile. Adaela went through her warm-up alone. She knew her process. Miss Delacroix had built it into her over a decade, the progression, the pace work, the breath count, the moment of stillness at the block before the start that he had always called finding the water. Heat 3 was called. She walked to her lane. She was in lane 5, center of the pool, which was not where she expected to be placed. The seating had put her there based on submitted times, which meant her previous splits had shown up in the system correctly, regardless of what Brody had or hadn't written. Small mercies. She adjusted her goggles. She looked at the water. She looked at nothing else. The starter raised the signal. She went. The first 50 meters she ran on instinct. Clean entry. Long pull. The mechanics so ingrained they required no conscious thought. At the turn, she checked nothing. Trusted everything. The second 100 she found her rhythm, the particular cadence that Mr. Delacroix had once described as the place where you stop trying and start swimming. The last 50 she simply refused to slow down. She touched the wall. She looked up at the scoreboard. The time was there. Big, unambiguous, indifferent to everything Terence Brody had and had not done. It was a personal best by more than a second. It was, by a substantial margin, the fastest time in that heat. It was also the kind of number that, in development competition, makes people in the timing area put down their clipboards and look at each other. Petra was in the timing area. She did not look at Brody. She looked at Adaela, and she smiled. What came next did not come quickly, because nothing in elite sport comes quickly when the system doesn't expect you. But it came. A selector, a calm, compact woman named Dr. Hartman, who had been watching Heat 3 because of one of the flagged swimmers, had been standing near the timing board when the result posted. She had made a note. She had made a call the next morning to the national program coordinator. She had said, "Who is Adaela Osei-Mensah, and why don't I have a file on her?" That question, asked in a quiet office in Ottawa by a woman who had spent 20 years in Canadian high-performance sport, turned out to be the one that mattered. There was an investigation, not the loud kind, not the public kind, the quiet, paperwork kind that is more thorough than noise. Brody's development records were reviewed. The blank assessment form was noted. The session attendance logs were compared with the training program allocations. Petra was asked to provide a written account of the development period, which she did, in 7 single-spaced pages, with dates. Brody denied everything with the confidence of a man who had always been believed. He said, Adaela's results had been inconsistent in training. He said the blank notes were an administrative oversight. He said he had no record of the incidents Petra described because they hadn't happened. Dr. Hartman reviewed the pool's electronic session access logs, which showed exactly who had swiped in and at what time on every morning for the previous 6 weeks. Adaela had swiped in at 4:58 a.m. on 31 of the 38 training days. Brody had never arrived before 6. The quiet investigation produced a quiet outcome. Brody was removed from the high-performance coaching roster and placed on administrative review. No press conference, no statement, just a name quietly removed from a list, the way things that never should have had power sometimes lose it. Without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without the dramatic confrontation the movies would have given him. Adaela didn't find out until Petra texted her a single sentence on a Thursday afternoon. "He's gone." She was at the pool. She read it standing at the edge of lane 8. She read it twice. Then she put her phone in her bag, walked to the blocks, and got in the water. The road to the Olympic trials was 2 years long and looked nothing like a straight line. There were injury setbacks, a shoulder impingement in her second year at Lakewood that cost her 8 weeks of full training and required more patience than she knew she had. There were fast competitors who had been in the system longer, with better funding and better access and the kind of institutional support that accumulates. When coaches believe in you from the start, there were mornings when the basement suite felt very small and the window that looked at the concrete wall felt like a verdict. She called her mother on those mornings. Adaela Osei-Mensah had retired from the hospital laundry. Adaela had arranged that, quietly, when the development stipend became enough to share. Her mother now spent her mornings gardening in a small plot behind the building in Brampton, and her evenings watching cooking programs on television, and she answered every call on the first ring. "Swim," her mother always said, and then, in Twi, the same word she had used since Adaela was 12. "Yenko, let's go." Adaela swam. The Olympic trials were held in Toronto. Adaela drove to them from Brampton in a rented car with her mother in the passenger seat and Mr. Delacroix, 71 years old, and still wearing the same Team Canada windbreaker in the back. They didn't talk much. The highway was familiar. The morning was gray and cold and Canadian. The kind of morning that asks nothing of you because it knows you're already on your way. The trials venue was larger than anything Adaela had competed in since Winnipeg. The stands were full. The warm-up pool was crowded with the best swimmers in the country. She recognized names, faces, histories. Women she had watched on television growing up. Women who had been on actual posters in actual clubhouses she had never been allowed to belong to. She did her warm-up. She found the water. The 200-meter freestyle final was the third event of the session. 8 lanes, 8 women. 1 spot on the team, the automatic qualifier place that would come with competing at the games. Adaela was seated 4th. She stood behind the block and looked at the pool. 8 lanes of still water, blue and indifferent, holding no memory of anything. The water didn't know who had been given lane 8. The water didn't know about the blank assessment form, or the paper bags, or the 11 years of hospital laundry. The water was just water. She thought about her mother sitting in the stands right now, in the same winter coat she had worn for 12 years because it was good quality. And she believed in keeping things that were good quality. She thought about Mr. Delacroix, who had given her his goggles on Saturday morning, because he saw something he couldn't explain, and to trust it. She thought about Petra, who had written 7 single-spaced pages with dates. She stepped onto the block, the start signal. She went. The race was 1 minute and 56 seconds long. Later, when people asked her what she remembered about it, she said the same thing every time. Nothing. She remembered nothing, because there was nothing to remember. No thought, no fear, no calculation, just the pull and the turn, and the breath, and the wall coming toward her, and her body making the decision to close the gap before her mind had a chance to participate. She touched the pad. She looked up. The scoreboard showed her name in first. The crowd made a sound she had never heard before and would spend years trying to describe. Something more involuntary than that. The sound of a large group of people, all understanding something at the same time. She pulled herself out of the pool. She stood on the deck, water running off her, goggles pushed up on her forehead, and looked for her mother in the stands. Adaela Osei-Mensah was standing. She was not doing anything dramatic, not waving, not crying loudly, not doing any of the things that get replayed on television. She was just standing, very still, in her 12-year-old winter coat, with her hands pressed together in front of her chest, and she was looking at her daughter. Adaela looked back. That was the moment. Not the scoreboard. Not the selection official who came to shake her hand. Not the photographers or the interviews or any of what came afterward. That moment, her mother standing still in the stands, hands pressed together, finally allowed to sit down. There is a kind of excellence the world tries very hard to miss. It misses it in lane 8. It misses it in blank assessment forms and 5 a.m. sessions that no one is supposed to see. It misses it in basement suites with broken overhead bulbs and children who swim in municipal pools on Saturday mornings because the pool is warm and the apartment isn't. It always misses it. Right up until the moment it cannot anymore. Adaela Osei-Mensah went to the Olympics that summer. She finished the 200-meter freestyle with a time that put her on the podium. She stood under the lights in a borrowed country that had almost decided it wasn't interested in her. And she received a medal, and she waved to her mother in the stands, and her mother waved back and then sat down. She had been waiting a long time to sit down. Coach Terrence Brody watched the race on television. He had watched every trials race, every heat, every final, tracking times from a spreadsheet he kept out of habit even now. He saw Adaela's name on the scoreboard. He saw the time. He remembered writing nothing in a notes field, and he understood, for the first time, the specific weight of nothing when it is the wrong choice. No one asked him what he thought. No one needed to. Some verdicts are delivered quietly. Some walls come down without sound, and some people, the ones who were told to take lane 8, the ones whose forms were submitted blank, the ones who found the weight equipment themselves at 5 in the morning. Some of those people cross the finish line, and the only sound is the one the water makes when it finally, completely, lets them go.